I feel in a way that I ought to be giving the paper I gave last year following this excellent speak this morning, Nicola, because there I spoke about a mother that deliberately prevented the children from getting the experience of a father. Today I'm going to speak about something quite different, and I want you to try and hold your imagination, because this will come across as quite simply, but it's quite a complicated case that may or may not resonate with you, but I hope it helps you think about how fatherhood skills can be prevented from entering the next generation. You'll see Freud, that's where it all started. Even modern psychology nowadays must have some link back to Freud. And Winnicott, you keep that one in mind as well. I've been asked to speak this morning about how fatherhood skills are passed from one generation to another. Knowing that I'm a psychoanalytic psychotherapist, I'm sure you will be expecting to hear something about unconscious processes that either allow or impede the successful inheritance of fatherhood skills by a family's younger generation. I have only 20 minutes, so please bear with me as I try and give an idea of the transmission of these skills and how they can be blocked, and what can be at stake when these skills are not passed on to the next generation. Now, psychoanalytically speaking, the skills of fatherhood are linked to the various functions within the role of the father. These functions are to prohibit, to protect, to differentiate, to separate, and support. Right? As is well known, psychoanalysts since Freud have been very aware of the sexuality of infants and the effect of this on their development into adulthood. Prohibition is the father's function through the Oedipus complex. Initially, this is to prohibit the incestuous desires of his children, himself and his partner. Freud saw this prohibition as being on the boundary between civilization and the state of nature. The father functions in the socialization of his children through prohibiting their animal desires for each other, him and their mother. Prohibition provides a deep sense of a boundary around the self and is evident in the laws of civilized societies seeking to protect citizens from themselves and each other. Freud famously said, "I cannot think of any need in childhood as strong as the need for a father's protection." Protection here is extended from the protection against incest to the protection against the world external to the family. The father is the boundary with the outside world. Lacan saw the father's role as bringing the knowledge of the outside world into the child's world in a measured way. Lacan was a French psychoanalyst some people may have come across in their training or in their professional lives. But the words of the father represent the boundary with this external world. Mahler and her colleagues researched the process by which identity formation begins in infancy. They concluded that the infant's early moves away from the mother, crawling further away from her than the mother felt safe, led to him or her developing a sense of self as seen by the mother. Off limits thus became the beginnings of a feeling of separate identity, to that of being the same as the mother. A great many child psychotherapists recognize that this sense of differentiation with the mother comes far earlier, through the ebb and flow of the feeding stage in early development. The infant is not yet separate because of the dependency upon the mother as dispenser of life-supporting care. But he or she does have a sense of the difference between them based upon his or her feeling different through not being joined to her. And just a point about Nicola, your speech, your talk. I can't see Nicola. She got sorry. Actually, infant observation reveals that babies, as young as that, can see fear and danger and tell the difference and know where the danger is in violence. I think you said it was a bit later, but it is infancy, babyhood. In the first few hours, first few days of life. This joining was a special focus for Marla and her colleagues. Their study also focused upon what happens in child development when this differentiation is not taking place and seems unlikely to. They commented upon the dangerous development of a symbiotic relationship. In this, the mother prevents child development because of her own needs to keep her infant as an infant. Abelin, one of Marla's colleagues, went on to research the role of the father as healthily intervening in this symbiotic relationship, or before it becomes one. He saw the father functioning as a third object, as one outside the relationship, whose appearance in it turns the dyad into a triad. The infant sees he has a relationship with the father. This is one dyad. He sees he has a relationship with the mother. This is another dyad. He then notices that the father has a relationship with the mother that he is excluded from. This exclusion from the parental dyad presents the infant with having to observe the parents, but not participate in their relationship. This enables him to develop an idea of observing and being observed from a position outside of a dyad. I'd just like to cross-reference with the violence and the domestic violence. At that point, children feel very, very powerless because they're outside of something that they have to witness. In healthy development, it's helpless. But in healthy development, the helplessness is frustration, which helps growth. When you're witnessing violence, it can pin you down and your growth and development doesn't take place. Yeah, where was I? Thus, a triadic family relationship gets into his mind. The nuclear family is thus a triadic structure that creates the opportunity for triadic dynamics to flourish in the infant. These dynamics are the basis of thinking differently to his parents, more independently than if he remained uninterrupted in a dyadic relationship. However, if the infant and mother are so symbiotically joined that the father's presence is simply seen as part of the structure and not within the dynamics of the family, his function then is to get in the way of their relationship. Usually this happens naturally at weaning, with the father supportively helping the mother and infant to accept a changed feeding regime. This brings a change in their relationship and a moving forward in development for the child. It brings about an appropriate separation of the child from mother. So we have 5 essential functions of the father in child development. If the father is absent or otherwise unable to function in role, all this child development is at stake. Further, by observing the way the father functions, the infant then child learns what fatherhood is and what its skills are. If I were to summarize all I've said in one word, that word would be protection. The father's presence functions to protect the infant from a potentially symbiotic relationship with the mother, and all that brings in terms of curtailment, development, misformed identity, unrepressed sexuality. You can also see what happens in domestic violence when children are so dependent on having functioning parents for their development. When there's violence around, it completely paralyzes development. So we have 5 essential functions of the father. Sorry, I said that. Where am I at? The father's presence functions to protect the infant from the potentially symbiotic relationship with the mother and all that brings in terms of curtailed development over the day. The old wives' tale speaks to us of picking up things about ourselves and our mothers through mother's milk. I will suggest we do the same about ourselves and fathers through what Alan Shaw has evidenced as rough and tumble play. And Warren Farrell spoke about this 2 years ago as well. This close contact with their families enables children of both sexes to gain an immediate and continuous experience of recognizing the difference between them and their fathers, the nature of themselves and their fathers, and what being a father and a child is about. Each individual father will have their own way of carrying out the functions of fatherhood, and thus their particular skills in delivering these functions will be individual to them. Whilst children may or may not incorporate these idiosyncrasies into their understanding and internal embedding of the functions, If delivered consistently, they will have an experience of these functions as helpful to their development. As with all human relationships, whether a father gets to exercise these functions depends upon a range of factors. One is the nature of his and the mother's relationship. Another is his relationship to his internal parental couple. That is, his own experience of being parented as a child that he internalizes and draws upon in order to be a parent. These two basic factors determine the opportunity for the skills of fatherhood to be transmitted to the next generation. In a presentation to previous male psychology conferences, I discussed a case that demonstrated it as not what the father does, but whether the mother allows him to behave like a father. Here I said that my clinical experience has taught me that Winnicott's famous comment needs to be taken seriously. It depends on what mother does about it, whether father does or does not get to know his baby. The more I look at this comment, I mean, this 1964 was one of the publications. Originally, he said it in 1957 at the World Health Organization. I mean, it really is quite a frightening thing, because the more you look at it, the more you realize he's investing, without thinking, power into the mother. Winnicott's comment immediately points to the mother as the gatekeeper of the father's access to his infant. It raises the questions whether and how the father gains access to his baby. It locates power in the mother and powerlessness in the father. It suggests that how the mother conceptualizes the father as a person and role will determine whether the father is allowed to perform his necessary role in child development. The effect of the 5 functions I've just mentioned are therefore denied to infants and children if the father doesn't get past the mother as gatekeeper. Ideotypically, the father offers his functions within child development in 2 ways, directly and indirectly. Directly is as described already: prohibition, protection, differentiation, separation, support. Indirectly, his role is to support the mother in her direct role with the infant and child. He needs to help her prohibit incestuous desires. He needs to protect her from the demands of the baby when they are excessive. He needs to help her differentiate herself from the role of mother and from over-identification with the needs of the baby. He needs to help her remain appropriately separate from the baby. He needs to support her as a mother and as a person. For the father to be able to operate directly and indirectly, he and the mother need not only to know each other very well, but love each other, as their functioning together in the interests of their baby is emotionally very tough for both. When they don't love each other, they tend also to either not know each other or have given up on what they do know about each other. My clinical experience tells me that the mother's decision about allowing a present father or an estranged ex-partner access to his baby or child is largely determined. In the case I want to introduce today, the 5 functions were denied because the father did not carry them, as he preferred to be more like the mother to his child. The mother, Faye, in this case, did not challenge this because it suited her to allow her partner, Rick, to vacate the paternal for the maternal role. This was disastrous for their child, Roop's development. Our engaging with our own internal couple is the basic psychic event in the course of our development. This couple is heteronormatively constructed. It is the intrapsychic experience of an intimate heterosexual couple union internalized as a dynamic object. Right, I'll turn to Faye, Roop, and Rick. Although I'm primarily focused on the father in this case, one has also to keep in mind that in not being firmly enough within her own role, the mother also brought things about in child development through not functioning enough maternally, and in not acting more firmly towards the father. Rick was driven by the conscious desire to be a different father than his internal father. Unconsciously, he was caught up with a desire to out-mother his mother. Fathers like Rick tend, therefore, to be in relationships with women who are either not driven by any aspect of their relationship with their internal couple, or they've found themselves with a partner who acts out for them aspects of their relationship with this couple. Rick was such a father, and Faye was such a mother. Rick and Faye first came to my attention because Roop, their 6-year-old son, had been referred to CAMS. Rick and Faye had been to the GP demanding that Roop be referred to the gender identity clinic at the Tavistock. He wore dresses to school. At home he wore makeup and Cuban-heeled girls' glittery shoes. He liked playing with dolls, but did not work very well at school. This did not concern his parents, as they said their aim now in CAMS was to ensure that I approved a referral to the gender identity clinic. They were reassured that Roop's school had allowed him to wear dresses and his Cuban heels and his makeup and use the girls' lavatory. I also heard that Roop had difficulty weaning, and this was successful only with the concerted help of a health visitor. Accompanying this, he was allowed to sleep in bed with his parents and eat his meals sitting on the floor away from them. These had been addressed by the health visitor, but only to come with Roop to CAMS. They hadn't really been resolved. Meeting the family, it was obvious that Roop's cross-dressing was his very direct challenge to his parents. Whilst he seemed completely immersed in behaving and dressing like an older girl than his years, he also seemed unsure of how convinced he was that he should become a girl. The parents said that they had never wanted to upset Roop and damage his development by giving him our values. Rick said that as a father, he felt he should not lay down the law. By now I was concerned. Protection and prohibition, as in not laying down the law and not passing on parental values, and differentiation and separation, as in needing the health visitor to help them with their issues. The father's role seemed to be non-functioning. I soon discovered that these parents were not in touch with their individual roles and selves as parents. They were being driven by their relationship with their internal parental couple. Roop was not protective from himself. His childhood sexuality was travelling in the direction determined by an uninterrupted fantasy. Prohibition and support did not appear to be being exercised because the parents did not see the need for protection. They saw support as coming from outside so long as it confirmed their parenting. They had disliked the health visitor but recognized Roop, not them, needed help weaning. School may have acted as a supportive prohibitor and protector, but had actually supported their parenting and a view of child development that confused a child's needs with what the child appeared to want. Ultimately, these parents now only demanded help in order to get Roop's gender development underway. However, they would give me a chance to help them to explore this further, which actually turned into some clinical work, aiming to help how they understood what parenting meant. And both of them said they were parenting for the modern age. By this they meant that their individual contributions were not determined by traditional gender-defined role functions. As we explored this, it became clear that Rick took on a great deal of traditionally defined maternal functions and struggled to identify any parental functioning. Faye took on no paternal functions and allowed Rick all the non-biologically related maternal ones. Rick was effectively not a father and a large part mother. Faye was in her terms of functions, not functioning as a mother. Rick worked full-time in IT and could work from home. Faye had left the labour market after Roop's birth. Now she was in a start-up from home. In the early years, Rick did the 4-hourly fees through the night, changed nappies, sterilised bottles, and took Roop for his medical appointment checks and immunisations. Faye said she had no problem with Rick taking the lion's share of the childcare, as she felt it important for fathers to be hands-on. Rick and Faye's internal parental couple were very similar. Rick had a very distant father who apparently was only in a presence when he was called on to discipline the children, usually very harshly. Faye said her father was very out of control. He beat the children, drank a great deal, and was otherwise absent from family life. Both of their fathers compensated for the harshness. Both of their mothers compensated for the harshness of the fathers through somewhat overindulging the children, by trying to meet their every need. Both had therefore experienced compromise, protection, and prohibition. Faye was happy for Rick to take over her maternal role because she somewhat resented her mother's over-indulging her as a child. Rick took it because he didn't have to risk acting like his father as a father. He identified with his overindulging mother and wanted to provide even more than she had. Faye had a different father to hers for her son, Roop. Rick had provided a different father to his, and a more indulging version of his own mother. From Roop's point of view, he had two parents providing him with reconceptualized traditional role functions, a reconceptualization that was confusing to him to experience. Roop suffered because his parents were driven to distancing themselves from their own parenting as children. However, they had driven themselves too far, as their need for not conforming to more conventional role types had left Roop without a paternal object to be an alternative to his mother. The alternative is also the father who helps gender development and sexual identity through marking himself as different in different ways to his boy or girl child. Further, through protecting the mother from the child's excessive expression of desire for her. The recognition of difference by the infant boosts the learning process. It also allows for the reality of separateness to settle more comfortably, as difference begets a sense of self as different. Roop was confused. He had nowhere to go with his feelings and acted them out. He wanted to be a girl because femininity and maternity were stronger in his development than masculinity and paternity. Now, I can stop now, because I finished. Okay. That's it. I rushed it. I'm sorry about that.
So I'm not sure if I understood correctly, but from listening to the talk, it sounded like maternal and paternal functions are quite clear-cut.
Yes.
And you mentioned kind of the example of the lion's share of the childcare,
yeah.
and including the feeding,
yeah.
Going for the man in that
yeah.
role did that.
Yeah.
But I think what's in my mind, I'm thinking about how that thinking might exacerbate some of the inequalities that are in the UK. So, for example, the refuges for domestic violence survivors, there's a massive disparity between, men and their kids not having hardly any spaces
yes.
in refuges, and only 13 organisations in the whole of the UK just for men and their kids, and then you've got a hell of a lot more for women. And if we think about how if childcare, including feeding and those sorts of things, are seen as purely paternal, then it kind of makes sense then why societal views and the government policies are kind of just allowing women to have more bed spaces so that they can be with their children, yes. compared to men, if you see what I mean.
No, I do. I mean, this has been set up deliberately as a sort of quite clear-cut case. I wanted to present things very clearly. In many, many relationships, there's a very healthy blending of the roles, of the functions. In this case, it wasn't. I was just trying to set up an idea in people's minds of when it doesn't go right. Nowadays, with modern families, with the sort of with both them working or just the modern idea of paternal, there's an awful lot of danger in men becoming overly identified with the maternal role. I mean, I'm a psychoanalyst, so I have to think about these things. I'm not making a comment on how society is running. It's to some extent that's society's business. I'm trying to understand what goes on when it goes wrong. When those gender differentiation goes wrong.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there for time. So I'm sorry. If you've got any further questions or comments, you can approach Andrew at lunchtime.